Hi everyone, my name's Wayne Middleton. I'm the Global Vice President for Risk for Momentus Technologies, and today I'm chatting with a good colleague and friend of mine from the UK, Professor Chris Kemp. Hi Chris, how are you?
I am good, thanks. Yourself?
I'm well, thanks. Chris is the CEO of Over Matter Consultancy, who provide advice to venues and event organisers on crowded places on safety, security, crowd science, counter-terrorism and other risk management issues in various parts of the world. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Chris, tell us a bit about your background in the music industry and how it was that you took an interest in risk management with events.
Well, I was working in the leisure industry, and I then got into kind of music management by chance, because what really happened was somebody came to my door and said, "I'd like to put our band on in your leisure centre," and it was a band who had an album in the charts and had a single in the charts, Dr. Feelgood. Said we'd sell out, and we did, and made a lot of money out of it for the venue. So I then, for a decade, promoted over 3,000 acts, indie bands, rock bands, and our venue became one of the top 5 clubs in the UK for rock music. Put on
Right.
theatre companies, dance companies, raves, comedy shows, gallery work. And I kind of fell into things like doing the lights, doing the sound, that kind of thing. And it's all went from there.
It's a really interesting background, actually, and I'm sure you've had others tell you that. But to move from, such a practical, hands-on, and delivering events into ultimately academia, which we'll talk about in a second, is an incredible journey. Tell me about the consultancy work. You've been in this space now for quite some time. You do a lot in safety and security, risk assessment, and incident management. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I really got into that not by chance, but by the fact that I saw how dangerous what we were doing as a venue were over the years. And I went to the university after working in the industry and decided that I would then push back into the industry things that I'd learned from having my own venues and being a promoter and a venue manager. And the interesting thing about it was then that things started to come to me. So even when I was working at the university, people started coming saying, "Well, what we're going to do?" And I went into the industry in those years when it was quite a small industry. And what had happened by the time I'd come out of it is all of these huge organizations had started to take on lots of the gigs and this kind of thing, and the smaller promoters have been phased out. But as you get bigger, you tend to forget about the little things. You tend to forget about the risks and this kind of thing. So at the university, we created music management programs. We created sports management programs, cricket management, football management, all these kind of things to try and put those elements of the business of risk and those kind of things into perspective. And then as we went through that process, we went into crowd management. I was approached by Mick Upton, who wanted to do a crowd management degree. This was years before we did it. I just met him one day when I was working at a gig while I was at the university, the Milton Keynes Bowl. It's Bon Jovi. And then one day I rang him up and said, "Let's do it." So we did, created the course. And as you know, the rest kind of history. It's perpetuated through lots of different areas, looking at that kind of thing. And when I left the university and went into my own business, all the people that I'd worked with throughout my career, I contacted, and we started to develop and take forward all these kind of activities linked to risks and other things.
It's interesting. I think you've been at the front end of risk management becoming a more accepted science, if you like, as part of important planning tools that we now see cutting across many other domains that all relate back to venue and event management. Now, there's a big event coming up this year. I've had a look on your resume, and I know that you've worked on Olympic Games in the past. What can you tell us about that? And Paris, of course, is coming up in the middle of the year. How important is risk assessment and incident management for really big events like that?
I think it's one of the key principles, because without the risk management structure, you don't really have anything to rely on. One of the challenges we've always had across the sector is that things like football, for instance, have to have a football safety certificate. They're kind of grounded in a document, which is the Green Guide in the UK, which is really health and safety law underpins that. Whereas with venues, there isn't a venue safety document. There isn't a license for which to put events on. So hence you see when something happens in the football industry, then there's a lot of supporting evidence, a lot of delivery, and a lot of information that helps you to put things in place before you put an event on. And I think one of the things with Olympic Games that you find is that the organizations controlling the games and delivering the games have a lot less delivery possibilities around risk, and it's all the organizations and subcontractors and contractors who come in and support that who really have to have that underpinning risk delivery. Because one of the things you find is when it comes to strategy for risk is something that is inherently supposed to be there, but with the kind of tactics and the operational elements that are on that other layer, they're things that people close to the ground have a lot more knowledge and information about. One of the biggest challenges with the Olympic Games is that it is a top-down delivery. So the strategy comes from the top, but the bottom-up filtering of the information and knowledge into that middle management sector has to be as good as the top-down delivery, because unless it's met and those two filter through each other, then what you don't get is a true delivery of risk. And to me, that's what larger organizations tend to miss out on. Because one of the things I've been working on for the past 2 years is a risk mitigation strategy for AEG in Europe. And one of the things I've found is that this company was just so open to everything that came forward. They wanted it to be a proper system, a structure, and a delivery that all and everybody could be part of a unified process. And to me, that's what it's all about, because you've got planning, you've got management, and you've also got, all the comms around these things. They're the three key things, but underpinning that is how do you mitigate the risks that are coming forward? And the only way you can do that is through the planning process in the first place. Because if you haven't planned to great detail, then you're stuffed when it comes to the 3 seconds, which are the present when you've got to make the decision. And that affects your future. So all that time that people say, oh, you'll make the risk there, what'll happen is that decision will be made. It won't, because unless you've got it in the planning stage, it's very difficult to deal with. Because when we've got emergencies, we're very good at emergencies. But when it comes to something like a crisis, there's no recipe book. So how do you deal with that unless you've planned all of your strategies, you've planned your contingencies, you've planned your emergencies, and then when it comes to it, you're in a much better place for those reflectors in your team to sit down and think, this is what we should be doing.
You make a very good point about the role of leadership in setting the culture and driving the planning process. I think without that, venues are setting themselves up to fail. You need to have, for a successful risk management program, leadership to be on board and walking the talk. And also, I guess, with major events, and you commented on the Olympics for being sort of top down, but also requiring that bottom up. And the challenge that overlays all of that is that it's about giving the right people the right information at the right time, because there's such an exponential growth in the workforce at a certain period. If you try and do it too early, the people aren't on board and the operational planning isn't at the tactical level yet. You do it too late and it's like the snowball's coming to town and it's going to roll over the top. So it is a real challenge. There's many moving parts. You talked also about the Green Guide there, and that's a good segue. The UK's had a lot of major incidents between the Hillsborough disaster and the Bradford fire, and of course the Manchester bombing only 5 or 6 years ago. How have those incidents shaped the approach to risk assessment and the management of incidents in the UK?
This is an interesting one. I mean, I've worked on expert witness processes across the world, cases in the UK, USA, Finland, even in Australia, Germany, and places like that. And the challenge is that it's making people accountable for their actions.
Mm.
And I think you can have all the guidance in the world, but if you never learn from your mistakes, it's pointless anyway. And one of the big challenges is in the UK, we've got maybe 6 or 7 different kinds of guidance. Some of them have a kind of legal standing, some of them are just real guidance. And where they haven't got a legal standing, then it's very difficult when you go through the prosecution process to get a criminal prosecution. And one of the challenges is until somebody goes to jail for some of the things that take place, people are not going to learn and think, oh, that could have been me. And the problem with this is the lawyers, because they like to find where the money's going to go and follow the money. And that's not the right process. The process is about the criminal prosecution first, and then that civil prosecution when you've got the right outcome, rather than debating already before you've even gone into the criminal process who's got the money, where it's going to go, and who's going to deal with it. Because there are many cases I've been involved in recently where they make you quite sick, really, because it's not about the person who's been killed or injured. It's about the actual money and where you're going to get it from. And it shouldn't be about that. It should be about justice. And when I see some of the activities that go on, you just think, why is the point of taking something like this to court? Because it's just a circus.
Mm. And I guess that's why things like coronial inquests or the inquiry that followed the Manchester bombing was so important, because it does put the money thing aside and focus on causal factors and make it public so that the industry as a whole can learn. And of course, we're a global industry and we should always be looking for any opportunities to learn from any of the incidents, because it affects all of us. Just want to talk about your academic background, and you've been involved with various research projects over the years. Can you talk a little bit about some of those projects and what sort of research is currently underway that you're aware of that relates to the venues and events industry, in terms of risk management?
Yeah, it's quite a difficult one because most of my research is for private companies.
All right, can't talk about
It's
it.
yeah, well, I can some of it, and we do small amounts of research. Like last weekend, we were researching onto the Champions League outer security perimeter at the semi-final of the FA Cup. So we're brought into many of these things to assess the risk, to look at all the different activities that are going on, and then to do a kind of expose of what we feel about it and how it is going to hold up under those kind of elements. And funnily enough, it's good to talk about this one because one of the things that gladdened my heart when I went to look at this was the brilliance of the way in which they'd taken a holistic methodology. Instead of looking straight at policing, they'd look at the interoperability between all of the stakeholders. Now, to me, that was fantastic. And instead of just looking at physical security measures, they'd actually looked at the kind of psychosocial elements, how people behave and why, and then reduce the elements that made people behave in a kind of antisocial manner, and really put at the forefront the meet and greet, a bit like the Olympics do, that kind of last mile thing, making sure people are safe, all that sort of stuff. And really looking at the way that that was done, it was interesting to see it in action with the people going through the process. And some of the people kind of bemused by, this is very different kind of way of doing it. So reducing risk and mitigating it, to me, is really important. And lots of the things we've done over the years have done this. One of the things was the Wembley Steps project, which I worked on for 5 years, where it was really, when you looked at it, a vanity project because it was to create a gateway to the stadium. But in actual fact, it was something, because of the security, safety, and a kind of the way that the service had been put in, it was there to give people a good time. So it was trying to reduce the risk in all of those areas by putting new dynamic ideas into place. Now, the thing about that was it went into the difficulties of the Euros and COVID. So the whole thing was based around the crowd dynamic, kind of going towards the Euros and also coming out of a COVID lockdown. So the behaviors were very different. The things that people were looking at were very different, and that sparked something that wasn't expected. But at the end of the day, they took all of that knowledge and information and they've put it into this project. And that, to me, I take my hat off to them, because they've learned from their mistakes. And, Stuart, the kind of safety officer, has just pushed all of this into that project. And that works really well. I mean, all of the things we've ever done over time have been to deal with this sort of stuff. And if you think about the pressure suit years ago, when we did the pressure suit, the two things that came out of that were really important to mitigate risk. First one was when you increase the temperature, because of the height of females within the front of the crowd, people were fainting. Everybody was pointing the finger saying females are weak, or this is terrible, they drink too much, somebody must be on drugs. Nah, it was because they were too hot, because the heat above their heads was just staying in there until it was released. And we only found out then, I mean, it went up 14 degrees over that time in that pit. That's a lot of temperature. And it wasn't till the end of the night, when it dissipated, that you saw the temperature come right down, and that changed the whole thing. And the second one was that kind of pressure release within the crowd, because we were measuring pressure in the suits, and the pressure was being measured on the Mojo barrier from the pressure monitoring system. And we saw it was very, very different. And also that as people moved around, the barrier at the front, the pressure was much higher than inside the audience. And so we've done extra research on that over the years to find out what causes that. And that's where you get crowd collapse and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think for me, having an academic background, I would call myself an educationist, not an academic, because I believe in educating people. And I don't think that academia really, when you're 18, gives you the right kind of background. You need to be in work and then go. So work-based learning in the realm, that kind of thing, to me, is what you should do. So many people now go into education later and benefit much more from it. I mean, in my master's and my PhD, everything I ever learned in those two, I've used. In my first degree, I think I've used one concept, and that's it. So, it's important.
We've got to keep learning.
We
You just
do.
talked about technology and the pressure suits. What advice can you give people as venue and event organisers or operators relating to technology and how they can use that to help manage risk?
Well, having worked with technologies at all sorts of clients, like the Grand Prix, everybody we work with uses some form of technology. Roskilde Festival, we mentioned earlier. It's about being serious investing, because what really worries me is you see these things, you see them work, you trial them, and people go, "Oh yeah, that was good, thanks," and that's it. They don't want to invest the money in it. But if you don't invest in this technology, because a key thing it helps you manage is your space, your time, and your human resource. Because one thing you don't have to do is use your human resource doing this. You've got machines and technology that can do it. So it saves you that. The second thing is that time. Time is the difficult thing, because if you can have an early warning system in there, then you can mitigate that risk, because you can see it coming, or you can be there before it takes place because you've had a near miss or something in that area which has been logged. And it's all that kind of stuff. And one of the other things is movement. You can map movement. You can, with your kind of systems like movement strategies, for instance, you can map what's a possibility that will happen. Okay, it's only a first pass, but what it gives you, because you're mapping things like football crowds coming out of grounds, for instance, you overlay those on top of each other, and then you get a kind of rhythm to the event. Then when you come to deal with that event, you know what the kind of rhythm's going to be. The stuff we do on musical genres, that's a bit more psychosocial, but the generic part of that is understandable if you manage technology that looks at that and shows the different incidents have taken place. So that kind of social interaction, and also that, you know, numerical, physics, all those kind of things, they come together. So you've got to have a quantitative and a qualitative view of these kind of things as well, because that helps you deliver where you want to go.
Fascinating, Chris. That's all we've got time for. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. Your insights have been invaluable.
Thank you. It's been really good to talk to you.